Your lawyers at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation are going to court to fight against equalization. My name's Carson Binda, and I'm BC Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, sitting here with my good friend and colleague, Devin Drover, who's just joined the team as our General Counsel and Atlantic Director. Devin's going to be leading the charge against equalization in the courts, while I'm going to do my best to run the comm side of things for us. Devin, jumping right in, what's going on? Why are we going to court against equalization?
That's a great question, and it's an important question. We're jumping in the fight because the Newfoundland and Labrador government, led by Premier Andrew Furey, thinks the province is not getting enough equalization money. This is despite not only the existing equalization money the province is getting, but all of the other transfer payments that the province is getting from the federal government. So instead, they're saying the current equalization formula is unconstitutional, and now they've decided to sue the federal government to get more equalization payments.
Okay, and let's talk about that. For the folks at home who don't know, can you walk us through what equalization is? So we know it's a $25 billion program. That's no small chunk of change. What is it, Devin? How does it work? Who wins? Who loses?
So equalization is essentially a program designed. The idea and principle is that every Canadian province should be able to operate relatively the same when it comes to offering essential services, your healthcare, your education. Essentially, it operates under a complex formula in which certain provinces pay into equalization, quote unquote, have provinces, and other provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador that are have not provinces get to pull from this fund. So while provinces like Alberta pay into the fund, provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador pull out of it.
Yeah, and that's a problem, folks, for a whole whack of reasons. On one hand, super unfair to taxpayers in those have provinces who spend billions of dollars paying into this equalization pot, but don't see a dime back. So it's unfair to folks in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, who are paying for it, but not seeing any of that money come back to them. But it's also an issue for have-not provinces. Devin, can you talk about why equalization is also a negative for provinces like Newfoundland and Labrador?
Absolutely. And I just want to back a second. And Newfoundland and Labrador, since, for decades, we've always been talking about how we want to be a have province. It was a key line for Premier Brian Peckford in the 80s that Newfoundland and Labrador would one day be a have province and the sun will shine here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We finally got there in the mid 2000s. And then what did we do? We wasted the money. And now we find ourselves back in that have not province range, trying to get more money from the federal government. But what happens when you have money flowing in from the federal government? You no longer need to be responsible for your financial actions. If you know you're going to get a bailout from other provinces, if you know you're going to get a check coming from British Columbia or Saskatchewan taxpayers, it makes provincial politicians less willing to do their own fiscal restraint, to balance their own budget, to pay back debt over time. Instead, it basically gives them a blank check to continue to be fiscally irresponsible. That's why we've seen now Newfoundland and Labrador, 13 of the last 15 budgets have not been balanced, and our taxes are the highest they've been.
Right. So if I'm a have-not province and I'm receiving those big equalization checks from folks in the West, why would I ever want to get off that? Why would I do the hard work of balancing the budgets, paying down debt, making responsible fiscal decisions and developing the economy when I know there's another bailout coming right at the end of the road from folks in Western Canada? Now, Devin, what exactly is Newfoundland and Labrador arguing, and what are we going to say in response? What are our legal arguments, and what are theirs?
Absolutely, and I just want to point out too that we're applying to intervene in this case, not because we represent the provincial government of Newfoundland and Labrador, and also not because we represent the federal government of Justin Trudeau, who, quite frankly, we don't trust to stand up for taxpayers. We're intervening because they're arguing that this vague section of the Constitution, and I'll read it for the listeners at home who aren't familiar with how waffly the language is and flowery it is. It says that Parliament and the Government of Canada are committed to the principle of making equalization payments to ensure that provincial governments have sufficient revenues to provide reasonably comparable levels of public services at reasonable comparable levels of taxation. So that's a mouthful, but let's even pay attention to those first few words. Parliament and the government of Canada are committed to the principle. What does that mean? I don't think that means that provinces are able to go to the federal government and sue to get more money. I think that's a vague statement that was intended to show some level of national unity. This was brought in the 1982 Constitution when obviously there were a lot of federalism issues arising in Canada. So where the province is trying to put forward that this line means, or this provision in the Constitution means they have the right to go sue Ottawa for more money from these other provinces. We're going to be arguing that the Constitution was never intended to be used as a way for the provincial governments to drag more money out of other provinces when they're making irresponsible fiscal decisions. And not only that, we're also going to be arguing that Newfoundland and Labrador could be a responsible province. They could be offering public services at reasonable levels of taxation. They've just chose not to by running balance or by running deficit budget after deficit, spending over $1 billion now on interest payments a year, and driving up taxes to a level that is unsustainable. It's not the federal government's problem. It's not Alberta's government's problem. It's not BC's problem that Newfoundland and Labrador has made the mess that they're in. And until we here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I'm here in St. John's right now, until we start to act responsible on the provincial level, no amount of money from the federal government will fix it. So that's what we're arguing. That's why I'm looking forward to going to court next month to start the process to argue that the taxpayers need to be represented in this fight, and that the Constitution was never intended to penalize taxpayers in other provinces.
Yeah, and Devin, I think you hit on a super important point for the folks at home to hear. You cannot trust Justin Trudeau to fight for you in courts, to stand up for Canadian taxpayers, because time and time and time again, he hasn't stood up for Canadian taxpayers. That's why your lawyers at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation are stepping up here. We need to make sure that you, as a Canadian taxpayer, are represented, because we don't think Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is going to do a good job at fighting for you. All right, Devin, do you have anything else to add for the folks who are listening at home?
All I would like to add is to echo what you're saying. We're going to fight this court case as far as we can, including if it needs to go up to the Supreme Court of Canada. We've done it before to fight for Canadian taxpayers, and we're going to keep doing just that.
Awesome. Devin, thank you so much for joining us today, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.